Thanks for showing up for our work. I'm Chris Minnich. I'm the CEO here at NWEA. Thank you. We now see data that is showing us that kids and schools are recovering from the point we were at during the middle of the pandemic. But we know that we have more work to do with kids, that returning to the status quo is probably not going to be enough for our kids because the status quo wasn't working for all of our kids, right? And so I'm really excited today to talk about two areas where we know they are gateways to our kids' success. And we have experts in lots of different areas at NWEA, but I'm really proud to have our leading mathematics expert here and our leading literacy expert to talk a little bit about what do we do in these two areas as we know they are leading indicators of student success. So Dr. Ted Coe and Dr. Miah Daughtery, I'm really excited to have them here with us. We're going to have a conversation. So could you guys introduce yourself? Ted, you want to go first?
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Ted Coe. I'm the Director of Content Advocacy and Design for Mathematics. It's a new position. I've been doing this for about 2 years, a little over 2 years, and it's reflecting this philosophical commitment in the organization to make sure that we're focusing on learning, right? Not just on the assessment side of the story. So my background is I was a high school mathematics teacher here in Phoenix. By the way, I live in Phoenix, and I do want to say, you guys are all saying this is pretty hot. I just want to tell you it could be way worse, all right? So count your blessings. I then went and I was a mathematics professor at a couple of the community colleges in the Phoenix area where I also served as chair. I did some time as an administrator as an assistant dean at Grand Canyon University. And then I went and I spent about 6 years working at Achieve, which was an organization that sort of kept track of all of the things that were happening in education and policy and curriculum and assessment across all 50 states. And that's where I got to meet my wonderful colleague, Miah.
Good morning. Thank you. I am an English teacher, a reading teacher at my core and at my heart. So my name is Miah Daughtery. I began my journey as a reading and English teacher in Detroit. And I did that for about 10 years. I taught reading and English in Detroit and Las Vegas. After I was a teacher, I left the classroom and was a reading specialist in CCSD, where I worked with all of our secondary, middle, and high schools on all things pertaining to literacy. When I left CCSD, I moved to Tennessee, where I was the state director of literacy. When I left Tennessee, I moved to DC, where I met Ted and was the director of literacy for Achieve. And now I am proud to be Ted's partner once again and an NWEA employee as a director of literacy for NWEA. And my job, our job, is to really think about and figure out how do we help NWEA evolve from a research and assessment organization to a learning research and assessment organization. And so we're going to talk about that today.
That's good. I'm super excited about that transition. I do know, I often say that 3 tests a year don't change anything with a kid, right? Just having information doesn't mean anything unless you use it to do something different. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the past, the present, and the future here, and we'll try to do this all in like 20 minutes. So let's start by taking a look back just a little bit. We've had about 10 to 15 years of standards-based changes, right? Well, we won't use that common word, but we'll talk about standards, okay? And so what has worked especially in your two content areas in terms of the shifts we've seen around how we teach mathematics and how we're dealing with literacy right now? Ted, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hey, I love math. Are there other people in here that love math? All right. Hey, fantastic. Yeah, so Chris, on to that question. Some of the wonderful things that we've seen happen over the past few years is teachers from state to state have been able to talk more openly and understand each other better, a common language, if you will. Students have been able to move from state to state without experiencing that jolt that they used to have if you moved from one state to another in the middle of your elementary school years. We've also seen some nice increase in focus, where it's no longer about all of the math every year with lots and lots of review, mile wide, inch deep, but actually focusing on the important things each step along the way. The coherence, the storyline that you can follow through the math standards of whichever state you're in, and the discussions about rigor have also been really wonderful to see. That's something that's still unfolding, even as recently with some cool happenings in Ohio. But the rigor is something in mathematics, but it certainly involves conceptual understanding, procedural skill and fluency, and application, and attention to those three things. These are some wonderful takeaways from what we said.
Literacy?
Okay, where are my reading people? English people.
Oh, there were more math people.
No, for the record, everybody is a reading person. So if you didn't cheer, you can recoup that later. In the reading space, I would say some of the positive things that I know I have personally seen as I've traveled across the country. Number one, the emphasis on text complexity, guys, that has stuck. When I go to classrooms, it's so heartening to hear teachers saying, we're giving our kids access to grade level appropriate text for the majority of the tier 1 instructional time. So that is one change that I'm glad has stuck. We no longer have lowered text expectations for students during instructional time. We also have done a really good job in shifting into building knowledge. Right? So teachers have been very focused on saying, let's not just pick these disconnected texts and see if they maybe one day fit together, but being very intentional and building a body of knowledge that tells a story. So students are building schema and building knowledge along the way, which guess what? Makes the text easier to understand and pays off in the other disciplines like science, social studies, and Ted, I'm even gonna say mathematics.
I'm happy to hear you say it.
Oh, you guys are gonna be friends by the end of this, huh? Okay, all right. So we talked a little bit about what did happen. So what did we miss in this process? I was part of some of the standards work 10 years ago, and one of my reflections is that we just didn't simply help teachers enough understand the changes we were implementing across the country in every state, whether it was a common set of standards or not. Every state was moving towards different expectations. But what are some other areas where we could have done better as part of that process?
Yeah, interesting, right? Just in the last couple of years, even we're starting to see more research coming out that's saying the standards aren't doing the kind of work that we really all expected them to do, and there are all sorts of theories and reasons why that might be the case. I do think one of my personal take on it is part of it is the standards are good to speaking about expectations on a global level. Right? But they're not so much about the expectations at the student level. This is something that we've really seen highlighted through the last couple of years, where students have all sorts of different backgrounds now and their opportunities to learn coming into the class. The standards are set up in such a way that they're about grade level, which is correlated to age. And so the proxy that we have is to be able to say, aim for the grade level expectations. This is a good takeaway. But at the same time, there's not sort of the portability or the flexibility to come in and say, and here's how to set high expectations when other things have to happen.
That's great. And literacy?
Well, for us, I can think of 4 key things. One of them is writing. So what we did not do well, we gave good writing standards and teachers assigned writing, but the actual instruction of writing is a place where there's a lot of room for opportunity and growth. The second place is thinking about fluency beyond grade 5. So again, as a past secondary teacher, I would often have students who had a real difficult time navigating the text, but I didn't know why. So NWEA, I know my team, we're hedging a bet that if you improve fluency, you're going to improve comprehension. And so next year, I'll be able to share some exciting news about that. The third thing I think we have a real place to go, what the standards didn't do as well as I would have liked, is addressing reading in the disciplines. If you want to be proficient in science and social studies, I used to tell teachers, I'd be willing to bet you're going to confront more text in social studies than you will in English. So teachers need support in helping students navigate text that they want students to read in and for their content areas. And the fourth place is that I think just as a field, we didn't do all we could do to prepare teachers, to support them to teach the standards and provide consistent support along the way. So another thing, Chris, I'm really excited about is that I know our teams are working on developing content PL that's really intended to support teachers in knowing the content so they are supported when they step into the classroom.
That's great. case you can't tell, I'm incredibly proud to have these two on our team. They're giving they're giving you guys a lot to think about right now. I would just also, I also want to stress that, what we do at NWEA is really centered on helping teachers be better teachers, right? And that everybody can use our information to take that next step. And you can see it in some of the things we're even talking about here. We're not simply talking about displaying data, but now we're talking about what do you do with that information much more deeply than we have in the past. And so that pivots to a question about where do you see teachers needing support in your content areas? Like we're in the present now, right? So this is the second part of our conversation. But what types of support and where do you see teachers needing that support? You want to start, Miah?
Of course. So I would say I'm going to divide that question into foundational skills and secondary literacy. I think first of all, I'm glad to see so many states have made the commitment to teach reading based on a science of reading backed approach. But with that shift, the teachers I talk to and interact with, if you guys follow me on Twitter, I'm interacting with teachers all the time, are really concerned about what do we do with our students who are coming in the door, who are emergent readers. How do we make sure we're teaching them the code? And how do we do that for all of our students, especially like our emergent bilinguals? The second thing I would say is for our secondary teachers, where students largely understand how to read, even if they have yet to become proficient, understanding the specific nuanced details or ways to attack text and ways to write toward that text in the different disciplines.
That's great. How about mathematics, too?
Yeah, I'd like to start by saying it depends on what we mean by learning mathematics, right? We got to come to agreement on what that is. And the way I frame it when I'm talking with folks is I say, look, mathematics involves at a minimum building up some ways of thinking, some habits of thinking, and some ways of doing. And so we want to make sure that as we're teaching mathematics that we're not just focusing on the ways of doing, the nice little procedures, but focusing on the ways of thinking as well. So one of the things that we're working on our team is we're building out something that we call formative conversation starters. And you can go to our website and you can go to the search bar and you can say, what are formative conversation starters? But it's the idea of saying, look, we know that students have to deal with some mathematics that endures. It goes from grade to grade. And there are ways of thinking that are associated with those things. For example, I might say, what are the ways that you can think about division? And then the following question would be, okay, well then, what are the ways that you can think about, say, 10 divided by 0.2? And if those two answers aren't matching up, then there's some thinking that you have some opportunity to build up, right? To say, oh, there are ways of thinking that endure that started back in 4th grade that go all the way to 7th grade. And so we've got some of these kinds of things that we're trying to push on to get to that individual level, to get to the student thinking level, to start with an asset-based approach and say, instead of finding out what the students don't know, let's find out the thinking that they are bringing into the classroom.
Yeah. And that's actually really consistent in ELA as well. Now, to be honest, Ted, I never think about division, but what I do think about, what I do think about is the fact that writing is thinking. And so when we get students to write, we are shaping and changing their actual thought. We're not just taking a thought and putting it on paper, but that way of thinking, that habit of thinking, that extends into literacy as well. And we're going to be thinking about what that means. How do we get students to demonstrate their thinking on text?
I don't know. You guys I'm telling you, you're going to be friends by the end of this. I don't know. You guys are getting along. This year is obviously a really important year. We see how kids in our data set, 14 million kids take our assessments every year. And so we can see across the country that normal growth trends are returning. But we did have a year where kids didn't have normal growth trends. And so this year ends up being a really important year, the year we're going to come into, especially in mathematics and literacy. So if you were in a school this year, how would you be spending your time, especially early in the year, with your kids? And what advice can we give to the team here about how we do that? You want to start in mathematics first?
Sure. I'd say take a look at the formative conversation starters, and don't look at just the grade level that you're interested in, because the stuff traverses from grade to grade. But to say, look, it's not about catching students up just to ways of doing mathematics, but it's making sure that all of those ways of thinking are developed alongside. That for instance, here's a question I like to ask. When you had your last mathematics experience as a learner, think back to that for a moment. Was it positive or negative? There's some groans. Or how about this? When you got done, did you feel like you had been given a box full of puzzle pieces, and you could shake the box and you could rattle it up by your ear, and you knew that somehow maybe these pieces fit together, right? That maybe there was some way, but all you knew is that I'd been given a bunch of pieces. Or were you able to sort of step back and look at the big picture? Could you see the story that's in there? Right? That it's making sure that we're aiming for that, not for just the shortcut, the way of doing, let me try to make sure that my students can do what a calculator does, or at least get close to it.
Yeah, good. Literacy?
You guys got stories in math?
Sure.
Okay, well.
Got some great stories in math.
Everyone's a reading teacher.
Some of them involve division.
So my answer, to build on Ted's answer, what I would actually do if I were back in the classroom, and this is going to be probably a little counterintuitive for this panel, I would begin with assessment. Honestly, I would begin with understanding what my students can do, not what they can't do. I want to say that again. I would begin by understanding what my students can do. So I would actually spend time doing some high quality beginning of the year assessment and some really high quality teacher-led, team-led, formative assessment at the very beginning of the year for the sole purpose of understanding what they can do. Guys, it's really hard to build on a negative. I don't know if you've ever tried to do it. I don't even know if that's true in math. So just if I'm wrong, just let me roll with it.
When you say negative, I think something else.
But it's really hard to build on a negative. Like, I can't do it. It's much easier to build on a positive. So I want to figure out what the kids can do and build from those quick, easy wins, because that's what's going to be the thing that pushes them and me from good to great. That's just what I believe.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Let's pivot to talking just a little bit about student mindsets, right? So as I've been walking around the halls, people have been asking me about, okay, so how do we accommodate students' social emotional needs at the same time we're really trying to drive on some content things? And so, I keep saying my response is mostly, well, it's a both and, so we got to do both of these things. But how do you think about setting the right mindset for your students, especially when, at least with my kids, they didn't remember how to go to school. They were out of school for almost 12 months, and they had some challenges integrating back into school. And so how do you think about those mindsets in your content area?
Okay, so I have to tell a quick story, right? And this was not me. This was a teacher much better than I ever was. My answer is the same. I'm gonna build on a win. So when I was observing a classroom in Clark County, Las Vegas, Nevada, it was a school that was in a population that was in a neighborhood that had high free and reduced lunch, high emergent bilingual. I think almost close to 90% of the students in the school did not speak English as a first language. It was a 6th grade reading and English block class. I come into the class, the teacher is doing her thing, and all of a sudden she gives a signal, and all these 6th graders, they stop what they're doing, and they gather their things, and they find a partner. It's just like this organized chaos, and they get to their partner, and they open up the text they're reading in their book, and child A reads out loud to child B. Child B listens, gives feedback, reads the exact same passage out loud to child A. Child A gives feedback. And when I tell you these children were excited, these children were excited. And so as I'm just like in the back, taking my notes, observing the class, these children are coming up to me, Miss, listen to me read. Guys, I taught middle school. Middle schoolers do not want you to listen to them read, right? That's not a thing. And so I'm listening to the kids read, and they're so excited for me to listen to them read out loud. The whole exercise took about 5 minutes. Then she brings them back together, goes to that same text, where now she's pretty sure most kids at least have been introduced to it, have a basic idea of what's going on, and they start reading the text. She starts asking her comprehension questions, and every kid in that room felt like a winner. Every single kid. So I would say my answer builds on the last one. Create quick, easy wins in the content. She got fluency practice, comprehension work, some social emotional work, some group work in 5 minutes. And now every child wants to do the rest of the reading.
That's good. Good. Ted and Matt?
Yeah, it's similar. I don't know if Chris, you've probably never had this happen, but if you're out maybe sitting on an airplane next to somebody and they say, hey, what do you do? And you say, I teach math. You know what their response is? It's not a positive one, right? And why is that, right? And can we change that? Can it be that mathematics, that we can change attitudes about mathematics? Well, we might want to call out some that we know that we could actually impact, right? So for instance, when your students leave your classrooms, do they think that math is about getting things done quickly? Do they think that math is just about finding answers? Do they think that math is just about finding one right answer? Right? Do they think about math as only for special nerdy people? Do they think that their ability has no bearing on whether or not they can learn mathematics, or that their effort has no ability, rather, on learning the mathematics? These kinds of things we can actually influence. We can make sure that we're not promoting those sorts of things, so that maybe 50 years from now, when a math teacher sits next to somebody on an airplane, and they say, "What do you do?" "Math." And you go, "Oh, I love that. Awesome. You guys are heroes."
Ted, you're a hero.
Yeah, that's what I'd like to see.
All right. So as you can tell, they have no passion for their content area at all. All right, so last thing I want to reference. So I've been following you guys around a little bit as you've been talking about your content area. I've pulled a couple quotes that I've heard you say. So I'd like you to respond to this. Right. So Ted, I was in a room with you the other day. You said, and I had to make sure you said this, but math has the potential to kill joy, dreams, and progress. We can make math useful, joyful, and relevant. And so those two things feel very different to me. So could you talk about what you mean there?
All right. So I've been calling this the notion of mathematical rigor mortis. All right, that because we have such misguided notions of what rigor is in mathematics, we turn it and we flip it into a gatekeeper, right? We flip it into something that's joyless and soulless, and then it just blocks forward progress. And we're here to say that it's time for that to stop, that we can cure this mathematical rigor mortis. We can bring joy to mathematics, right? We can bring humanity to mathematics, and we can make sure that mathematics is no longer serving as a blockade to forward progress for our students, as a filter, but rather one that's lifting them forward in where they want to go.
That's great. Thank you. And Miah, when we were rehearsing, you said this, and so I didn't tell you I was going to use this quote, but a good book is a puzzle that you're always solving. So what did you mean by that?
It's true.
Yeah.
So the book doesn't change. You do. The words stay in the exact same order on the exact same page every single time. I remember the very first time I read Beloved by Toni Morrison. And if you follow me, I write a lot about Toni Morrison. She really actually changed who I am as a person and an English teacher and a reader. And at the first time I read Toni Morrison, Beloved, I was 13. And the reason I read Beloved at 13 was because I always wanted to find the biggest, hardest book that I can. And that was the biggest, hardest book that I could find. So I picked it up and I read it, and I understood, when I say none of it, I mean none of it. I mean none of it. And so I read it again in 11th grade with a teacher. And when we read it the second time, I said, "There's a ghost?" Ghost? What? Who put the ghost in here? Right? And so, honestly, since then, I've taught Beloved 5 or 6 times. I've read it, honestly, almost every single year. I still have my very first copy. And so I have a historical record of my thinking of every single time I've read that book. And what I realize now, I'm over the Lord's age of majority. I'll put it like that, but I'm the age of majority. At this ripe old age, Beloved is a different book than it was when I was a 13-year-old girl. What I get from that book is completely different in 2022 than it was in 1995. So the book doesn't change, you do. And as educators, we have to remember, when our students encounter the book for the first time, they're not going to have the same experience you're going to have as the 15th time reader. So the book doesn't change, the reader does, and each reader will be different. And we have to use each individual reader's background, history, assets, knowledge, interest to build their love of the book they have in front of them that first time.
Would you please give it up for these two? It was such a good conversation. Thank you.